If I were king for a day, if I could do anything in the enterprise that I wanted to do, had no resistance, all the money, I could do whatever I wanted to do, what are the things that I would do, right? So you want to think about it through that lens. So what levers are we going to pull? And the three ways that I typically think about transformation is through this lens of culture, practices, and structure. And what I find is I look at the agenda for this conference, and most everybody that I read about in these things, they think it's a culture problem. Who believes that Agile is fundamentally a culture problem? I'm setting you up. Come on, be brave. Anybody? Anybody think it's a culture problem? Yeah. Well, so, Olaf, how you doing, man? So the thing is, the reason why I deprioritize that in my worldview is because a lot of times as you go into organizations, there's a lot of real physical barriers to doing change. And the fact that nobody will go into that and fix it with you feels like a resistance to change problem. It feels like an unwillingness to do new things problem, okay? But what I'm kind of asserting is that those barriers are real. Breaking down those barriers costs money. Breaking down those barriers takes time, right? And getting everybody on the same page all at one time is non-trivial. So sometimes when people are resistant to change, it's not because they don't want to change, it's not because their culture's bad, it's because they can't see how to get there. Okay? So the next thing that I see quite often is that we're going to deal with it from a practices perspective. So we're going to learn how to do SAFe, or we're going to learn how to do Scrum, or we're going to learn how to do large-scale Scrum or discipline Agile delivery. And it becomes about what you do and the roles that you play and the ceremonies that you perform. Well, what I would suggest is that the fundamental hypothesis underneath Scrum, and this is really explicit for a long time, is that people will tell you Scrum doesn't solve your problems, it just shows them to you, right? Well, if you do Scrum and Scrum shows you your problems and you don't have the agency in the organization to fix those problems, you're just going to be going through the motions of Scrum, okay? And that's the thing we're seeing in most organizations now. People are doing Scrum, right? That's not hard. People are doing SAFe. It's just that the organizational impediments that are required to be removed to do those things effectively, we don't have the ability to do it. Okay? So if you approach it from a culture perspective, you're relying on the fact that if I change hearts and minds, I'm going to get the authority to go and change the systems of delivery. If I introduce practices, need my coffee now. If I introduce practices, the idea is that those practices are going to show you your dysfunction, and then you're going to be able to remove them. What we see in practice is that people are going through the motions and they're creating a cultural narrative, but they can't actually fix anything that's necessary to be fixed. And so my hypothesis, okay, my personal market hypothesis, and you guys have to decide for you what you want to attack. My personal market hypothesis is that if we can get the fundamental structures of the organization, and by that I mean team formation strategies, how are we going to do governance, what are we going to measure and control, those kinds of things. If we can get agreement on how to create alignment within the enterprise, then we win. Okay? Because if we can create alignment within the enterprise and enable that aligned organization with really awesome Agile practices and create a different operating model, we create space for culture change to take place. So while I would agree culture is super important, it's like judo instead of karate, right? You don't come and tell the organization the culture's bad and say this is what the culture should be. You align the systems of delivery, you enable it with an operational model, and then you encourage and guide culture over time. So is it a culture problem? Sure, it's a culture problem. But is it a culture first problem to solve? I don't think it is, right? And so we're going to attack culture by dealing with the fundamental structure of the organization and its operating model, getting the Agile practices installed, and then helping that emerge over time. Okay? So from a transformation hypothesis perspective, right, you guys have to decide what do you want to attack. If you're going to attack culture head on, you guys need a really solid hypothesis for how attacking culture head on is going to actually solve the problem. If you're going to do it by teaching people practices, what does that mean? If you're going to attack the structure and the operating model, how are you going to go do that? right? That's your transformation hypothesis.